Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Once again, Dr. Carroll has found his way through the madness and into the darkness of the Fox Den for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on LordeStarfox Radio. We have very many things to attend to, like we always do, yet first I am so parched. Absolutely delicious. A tad bit more messy than preferred, yet no worries. Nutrition is nutrition. Without further ado, let's get ready to dance.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf. And everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night. Yes, once again, of course, it is midnight lycanthropy time on LordeStarfox Radio. I do appreciate everyone once again tuning in as Dr. Dennis Carroll and myself try and figure out what is going on with the phenomenon called the Dogman. Also, with missing people and all kinds of other gnarly werewolf-like sightings. Dennis is already sitting around the late night fire waiting for us to go join him as we again burn the timber into the early hours of the morning. You are officially hanging out in the stomping ground of the Midnight Society. Dr. Carroll, how you doing, man?
All right. How's everything going, sir?
Busy such as yourself, yet no complaints. Editing, got some great evidence coming in from a woman we've been speaking to down in the LBL. Got a ton of other interesting things that have been shared to me. Looking into the case down in Florida, a lot of people I respect and value their opinion don't seem to think two black bears would have been responsible for the unaliving of that 89-year-old as well as his dog near the nature reserve. Yet I will say there have been times where I do know multiple bears have consumed somebody. That is what happened with Timothy Treadwell. There was two bears in that territory that they believed were part of the attack. One of them, they were able to check and it did have food of him, his remnants in its belly. Yet the other one, they were not able to test it, but the way it was acting and hanging around the area, they believe it was either that larger bear's offspring or its daughter per se. Either way, though, that is brown bears. Brown bears are different than black bears. Yes, so the tendency, well, aren't going to be exact spot on. Yet again, though, I don't see why a per se mating couple of a black bear. Also, maybe you could have had a mother with one of its cubs still that was old enough. How do you feel about that?
Actually, yeah, I've talked about that over the years, and I think there's been some sightings definitely of some very mangy type bears that are very skinny, especially when they come out of hibernation.
Hmm.
After winter, their coat, they're not as full, they're not as plumped out as they usually are, and if they have a skin condition or they have a little mangy disease type going on with them, they can look very startling, definitely. And I've actually seen bears standing up in the woods like that had their coat just like hanging on them almost. Just like, somebody had walked up to somebody very skinny and put a bit of coat over them or something. And it's a very interesting thing to see, especially when bears, when they get like that, they tend to, I don't know why, I'm not a bear expert, okay, but I've seen them a good many times to watch a lot of their habits and things that they do. But it seems like when they get in this kind of condition, they tend to stand on their hind legs more. I don't know if it's the weight off of them or what. If they've lost a lot of weight, it may be easier for them to stand up that way for longer periods of time. But if you see something like that standing in the bushes, and it's not very distinct, if it's not out in the wide open area, you could easily mistake that for something that looks like a dog man. I mean, it's
Hmm.
not that far fetched. It's got the muzzle, it's got that look a little bit to it. So I think a lot of times there may be some misidentification going on. But when it comes to missing people, like you mentioned earlier, I think we need to all get together and coordinate our information a lot more as to how some of these missing persons may correlate with some reports of Bigfoot and Dogman and other cryptids. We need to kind of nail that down and see if there is a definite pattern going on with that. I think there is, but the more the more information you can get on something, the bigger picture you get on it, the clearer the pattern and the clues become. You know.
Super interesting for sure. Before we start diving into what you would like to dive into tonight, no pun intended, do you feel two black bears are responsible for this
Mhm.
as what is being told to the media outlets? Or do you think, like some of the other people, I value their opinions, that something else unalived this guy and his dog? A lot of people, like I said, part of our science team and others, seem to think it wouldn't have been two black bears. But like I just said, though, if you have a breeding couple, so a male and a female, why would they not hunt together? I don't know how long they stay together after they mate. Also, I do know cubs stay with their mothers. It's pretty reasonable to
Yeah.
think maybe you could have had a mother and her cub that attacked this guy and his dog. I don't know. What do you think about that? Was it bears that did it to this 89-year-old, or do you think some other animals at play here?
That's a possibility. You can be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I've often said that that's usually the way my luck goes sometimes. I'm usually in the wrong place, definitely at the wrong time. And you don't want to run into a bear or anything like that, matter of fact, be it a mountain lion or whatever, and they're having a bad day. You may have to pay for
Exactly.
that, definitely. But the you know, you can't really predict any kind of a wild animal what they may do in many ways because they're very loose cannon in that way. It just depends on what a lot of the factors are, some that you don't even know about that are going on at that time that can drive them to do things like that. They can be sick, they can be hurt, they can not be feeling well, maybe they ate some bad berries or whatever the situation. They can be taking it out on you or taking it out on nature around them. I have seen animals do that. Animals get angry just like we do. They get stressed out with anxiety like we do. But they react in different ways. Of course, I've seen some humans act like that, definitely, um, because they got mad, they don't feel good, or whatever the situation is. They tend to do that. They tend to strike out at things like that, and you gotta all that's the one thing when it comes to wild animals you can do, and that's to always expect the unexpected on these guys because they're liable to do anything. I mean, you can't predict. They're not very predictable at all in that way. They do have manners, they do have instincts, they do have patterns that they follow, natural stuff that they do. but they can deviate from that just as quick as you and I can take another road or another intersection. They can do that too. They can change in a drop of a hat. So we got to understand that. That's what you deal with wild animals. I talked to a lion tamer one time. He loved his lions. He had a very good and deep relationship with them. He said, but I can never trust them. I can never turn
Hmm.
my back on them. I can never let my guard down because that's their nature.
Doesn't that remind you of the gentleman? This was when I was really young. There was like a circus that used to travel around all the time. One of the people ended up getting unalived by a tiger. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember they were act in Las Vegas, I believe. Right?
Yes, and they had come all around. Like I said, I was super, super little
Mhm.
when this had all occurred, but yet as I,
Mhm.
grew up a little bit, I remember then putting two and two together. But look at that right there. I mean, again, though, those animals were under stress, as you stated, in captivity. That probably wasn't the best of conditions. Either way, though, those two guys claim they knew the behaviors of them and they knew them, yet no, they obviously didn't.
Well, there's a very, very famous case of a circus elephant that was hung for a man. They brought a crane in the
Oh,
animal,
yeah,
and
I
it took it
remember
hours.
hearing it.
Yeah, and the reason why they found out later why he probably the man, as he was angry because he had a very bad tooth, and he was in a lot of pain from it. Was an abscessed tooth. The elephant had an abscessed tooth, and that's probably why he did what he did. And you know, there are a lot of motivating factors in these things that you got to consider. And animals are just like us. They have feelings like we do. We got to understand that. They're coming from a different direction sometimes, though.
Even my squirrel, sometimes she's unpredictable, meaning there's times where I think she's just begging for something or wants me to bend down and pet her, and then she just leaps at like your shoulder or something or your face. You're like, whoa,
We talked about that last time. How we tend to put human attributes on animals. And think
Yes,
that they're gonna do different. That's us, though. That's not the animal's fault. We're doing that.
exactly. Isn't that the truth? That's so
Yeah.
funny. Great.
We're guilty of humanizing a lot of things like that. They really don't deserve humanizing because they're different things altogether. And we've done that with Dogman to a certain extent. We've done that with Bigfoot and other cryptids. We tend to try to humanize them, and say, well, maybe they're doing that because that's what I do, but they're two
Yep.
completely different subjects that you're looking at. Yeah, you're looking at, sometimes we got to be very careful how we look at things through a certain filter that we have. And that filter is put there by our minds.
Preach. Excellent stuff. It is. Very acute observations. If you think that was good to the audience, yes, well, we are going to hand Dr. Carroll the mic back and allow him now to tell us about a very strange case he has been covering recently. Let's do this, my friend.
Yes, this is one of the strangest that I've gotten here recently. I get a lot of cases that come in. I do have a paranormal consultant service, so a lot of people tell me their stories and all that. And this was one that came in about a week and a half ago, and it's very strange. And I've been trying to get some feedback on it, but haven't had any yet. But I haven't really told anybody about a lot of what's going on with this. But it comes from out of Indiana, and I can't say exactly where at in Indiana, but that's where they originated from. And what the guy said is that this fellow contacted me, and actually it was via phone and not email. But he contacted me and said, he wanted to ask. He said, Dr. Carroll, I've had a very strange experience, and I need to tell you about it, so that maybe you can, help me get my mind wrapped around what it was. I said, sure, spill the beans, let's hear what you got. So he said, here's the story. He said that there is near his house, and he's like in sort of a subdivision, but there's not a lot of houses around. There's some like fields and some wooded areas. And one of these larger wooded areas goes into a park that's nearby there. And he said that he was it was kind of late in the day. He was out walking his dog. You know, he had a little small, I think, I forget exactly what type of dog it was, but it's kind of a mid-sized dog, not a big dog. And he said that he was out walking his dog through the park, and he was on his way back. So he thought, I'll skirt by the park and go around this wooded area, which was close to the park. So that's when he heard some very strange sounds. And this is he said that it was like late in the day, but it wasn't, darkness yet. Darkness had not fallen yet. But it was just that period. I call it sort of the dark 30 before darkness, the dark 30 minutes before it hits. But he said it was the period right before twilight, and the sun's going down. The shadows are getting longer and all that stuff. And said that he heard a sound, some weird sounds, and he said I still can't tell you what they were, but it just caught my attention. I never had heard anything quite like it before. And he said it was like a mumbling sound, like it was somebody talking, but you couldn't decipher what they were saying. But he said it was more than one person. And he thought, well, what the heck is going on? Maybe some, people were doing something bad out here in these woods, or what's going on. So he said, I walked into the woods just a little bit further with the dog. And he said he came over sort of like, it's not a hill, but sort of like, just a rise. Like, and he came up over a rise and looked down, and he said beneath him was sort of he said, described it as sort of like a bowl like area, that was stretched out. I guess we would call it something like a glen or something like that. And he said there were no trees in it. There were a few trees, but it was not heavily wooded, and there were heavier woods around it. And he said that's when he saw, and it was like late in the day, the sun was starting to go down. He was kind of half light, half dark. And he said he could see some shadows moving around in the bushes and all that. And he said what he saw next is what surprised him, because the dog reacted to it as well. The dog, and he said what was interesting, the dog's reaction was it was sort of like it had a surprised look on his face, and yet it was like it had a scared look. It had a little bit of a fear to the dog. And he said this dog is kind of like a little lion. He's fearless most of the time. He said this was a very strange reaction for him. And he said he thinks without doubt the dog didn't see what he was seeing, because he was like over the bushes and he could see down in there. The dog could smell what he was. Yeah, I think that's what he was talking about. That he thought the dog could smell what was going on here, and that's what got the dog's attention. So, anyways, he looked over in the bushes. He could see shadows moving around. He could see somebody or something moving around. And all of a sudden, one of the shadows kind of stepped out a little bit more. Now, what it was, he said, that they were walking around a campfire, but the fire was not burning. It was like smoking. Somebody had been using this fire. All this had evidently taken place before we got there. It was just a little bit of smoke coming up from it. And he said, what stepped out of the bushes into a little bit more of the clearing, he could see it. And it was what you would describe as either a werewolf or Dogman. And that's what scared him so bad. He said he didn't know a whole lot about Dogman, but he knew about werewolves from movies and stuff like that. So he said, that's what I thought it was. And I kind of agree with him. It sounds more like a werewolf kind of activity than Dogman, but I could be wrong. Anyway, he said this thing steps out and looks around a little bit, and evidently it caught a scent of the dog, or it caught a scent of him. And I've said this before, that these things have a super sensitive scent factor in them. They can smell things that you and I cannot smell. I have seen police dogs be able to find ammunition and luggage. They could smell actual gunpowder and bullets and guns. That's how very keen and smart their smell can be. It's very essential to law enforcement that they can do these things. So definitely, if you've got something like either a werewolf or dogman, there's no doubt about it that they've got very hypersensitive senses things going on with this. So anyway, I think that's what he was talking about. That's what he thought. I wasn't there, so I'm just telling you what he said. But he said the thing kind of looked over his way, but it never made eye contact with him or anything like that. But he said, I swear that when he turned his head, his eyes were red, not glowing red, but just sort of, it caught his attention, sort of an eye shine red, you know. And he said that's when he looked, he could see in the bushes other things moving around. What he thought, without a doubt, he couldn't say it for 100% sure, but he thought he had come upon a group of dogmen or werewolves standing around this campfire, evidently. And he said that's when he noticed one other thing. He noticed that lying on the ground around the campfire were long, broken branches. And he said they weren't laid out randomly. It looked like to him. It looked like there was some kind of pattern to it. Okay. Now I'm going to tell you something about that. This is when I really perked up when I heard this, because this is something I'm going to relate back to you in a minute. So don't forget it. Anyway, he said these things were moving around, and said as he stood there and watched, they slowly sort of just, went on into the woods, that wood area, and they left. And that included the one he saw. He stepped back into the bushes and they were gone. But he said they were like making a noise. They were like mumbling or chanting, almost like they were chanting or some kind of a ritualistic kind of a chant thing going on or something. That's it. That's what it sounded like to him. It weren't like they were talking to each other or singing or anything like that. So they were like they were chanting or mumbling something like a chant. And he said as they were gone, it scared him so bad. He said, I'm getting the heck out of here. This is bad. Whatever this is. But when he told me these sticks were laid out in a pattern, you know, that made me kind of a bell rang off. Red flag went up. Okay. And I said, oh, you know what? Sometimes in witchcraft circles or in coven meetings, they will lay sticks, stones, or whatever the situation is, into a star pattern or a pentagram type thing. And the campfire will be in the center of it, the fire itself. This is a sacrificial fire like thing that you're talking about here. It will be in the center of the star pattern or the pentagram. And that's why I wondered about that. I asked him, did you notice this pattern? Did it look like a star and all that? He said, I really couldn't tell. I said, I was so scared. I was getting out of there. I was getting out of Dodge. I'd had enough. Said, I didn't want to stay around this. And he said there was one other thing that struck him while he was there. And he said he thinks it affected his dog as well, because they were trucking it on out of there. He said that there was a distinct smell of sulfur, or like a rotten egg, and also kind of mixed with like a carrion kind of a smell, deteriorating meat or whatever the situation. He said that he got a whiff of that. So that's when he left. So he said he got to thinking about it the rest of the day, and it scared him so bad. It scared him. He said, I didn't really want to leave my house the next day. He said, I didn't know if those things were going to track me down or what, or whether they were going to come looking for me and everything. But he said a couple of days later, he went back by the park. But he didn't have his dog with him this time. And he looked at that area and said the campfire, the sticks, and everything was gone. It was just clean. There was nothing there. No footprints or anything. He said, but all the time I was standing there looking at this place, he said, and I didn't stay there long because it was giving me the heebie-jeebies bad. Said it was like somebody or something was watching me all the time I was in there. Said I left, and he said, I'm going to tell you, Dr. Carroll, I am never going back there. I'm not going back there again. I said, it is. I've been having nightmares about it. Been thinking about it. It has rattled me worse than anything I've ever had happen to me. And he said, I've been in the military. I've seen some freaky stuff, but nothing like this. And he said, the feeling I got from all this was pure evil. And so here's the interesting thing that I got back from this, and I want to talk to him some more about this if I can, and try to get some. The more you talk about and interview someone, sometimes the more information you can draw out. After they've had a while to access it with their own minds, that's the way to usually go with that. But here's my thought on this: were they holding some kind of a werewolf or dogman ritual out there in the woods with this? Was it some kind of a werewolf coven doing this, or what? But what was so interesting was that pattern he saw on the ground. He could not say 100% sure that it was star-like pattern, but he said it did remind him of that. when he thought about it later, he didn't think about it at the time, but when he thought about it later, it did have sort of like a star-like or pentagram type confection to it. But he said that what really affected him the most, seeing that thing, and he didn't see it completely 100% because it was still in some of the bushes that were around there. And when he stepped out, he said, just I saw enough that I never ever want to see that thing again.
Yikes. That is some nightmare fuel. I love that terminology, which is why I dubbed my little sister podcast, which I have with Barb Hartman, Camp Nightmare Fuel. Very bizarre, very interesting stuff right there. Since you're the one that covered it, what do you personally think is happening?
I think it was some kind of a ritual type. It sounds what it sounds like to me. There was some type of a ritual going on. Now, whether they're dogmen or werewolves, it's beside the point. It could be either one. And, we've talked about this over the years, and I investigated so much of this. I was coming to the conclusion a long time ago there is definitely, just like there is to the moon, there is to dogman and the werewolf, there is a definite dark side to this stuff. Absolutely. And I think, our friend Jessica Jones talked about this the other day on one of her shows about some of these dogmen and stuff being seen around cemeteries. These are also signs that you look for when dark kind of entities. They like to hang out in places of trauma, pain, suffering, whatever the situation. They seem to be drawn to these places, whether they're demonic, whether they're cryptids, or whatever the situation is. They seem to be drawn to these places for a reason. And this is a very distinct telltale sign. And when you run into these kind of dark entities, that's exactly where they hang out at and what they're associated with. And I asked him, were there any, one other thing I forgot to mention, I asked him after the interview, were there any cemeteries located nearby there, any graveyards? And he said, yes, a few, about like 100 yards from one side of this woody section that he was in. There's an old church cemetery. And I found that very interesting. It was that close to it. Um, that's another red flag for me.
Yikes. Again, pretty gnarly stuff right there for sure. So much going on. I would always defer to you and other members of my science team that understand more about the paranormal, the supernatural, or ceremonial type aspects like you just talked about. I feel really comfortable with animal behaviorisms, figuring out why the people are missing and stuff. Yet those topics are interesting for sure that I'd mentioned. Yeah, I know so much of nothing really about supernatural and paranormal type stuff or any of the occult things. I've obviously seen documentaries and know of individuals that partook in those type of activities. When you do explain it, though, it sounds pretty terrifying for sure.
Well, I'll tell you, when I do talk to him next time, if I get another chance, and it was kind of a brief, it wasn't a very long interview, unfortunately. He didn't have the time to go too deep into it, but if I get the chance to talk with him again, I definitely want to find out if there are any cases of missing people around there, or I'm going to ask him what kind of a park it is. There are certain kinds of different types of parks. They can be, parks with playgrounds, or they can be, picnic parks, or whatever the situation. I'm going to try to find out what kind of a park and what kind of situation this was close by to. But he talked about this, of course, was there's some like farmland, I think he said, and open land close nearby there. So this is not in the middle of a city or suburb, although there are houses around there, I think. But there's a lot more wooded areas to it. So that's an interesting location, definitely. I would love to go there and do some on the boots ground research in that area.
That reminds me of, unfortunately, up here in Maine, there was a girl that went missing 7 months ago, and they have no idea where this poor little girl went, man. They brought in extra help. Nothing. I mean, obviously, there's many things that could have partaken in a vanishing of somebody that is vulnerable. Again, though, pretty bizarre stuff how somebody can just vanish and nobody can find them. Obviously, somebody out there knows what happened to her. Yet 7 months with no answers. So you have some brilliant minds that have worked on other cases and such that were able to solve them, working and trying to figure this out. Again, so many missing people. A lot of people don't realize every year you have anywhere from 1,100 to 2,400 people that just vanish in our national parks. Poof, gone. That's pretty messed up stuff.
Well, I think, we need to consider the factor that some of these people may go missing because, they were used in some type of ritual type things, or for certain purposes, very dark purposes. I'm not going to say they all are now. I'm not going to paint it all with a broad brush. I never do that. But just like I say that everything is not demonic, you have to take it case by case to determine exactly what's truly going on. But it is very strange that some of these disappearances can correlate definitely with some of these satanic holidays. And a lot of times, these disappearances are outside or very close to national parks. And I think there's a twofold factor included with that as well. You have a lot of people, especially in summertime and fall and places like that, they're out in the national parks. So you got a lot of traffic going through there, And that's one factor. And another factor is, of course, you got, around the park itself. They may not be in the park, but you got people, living in houses. You got schools, you got areas like that outside these parks. And some of that may bleed over into the park sometimes, And if something is going on in some of these national parks, that might be another telltale sign. That's another distinct thing you've got to think about. But I'm not saying that all of these things are related to that, but I think there's a certain factor of these things. That would be an opportunity I'm sure they would take if they were going to do that, definitely. So you would be on the lookout. They're like predators, like predators in wild, like lions and tigers. They're always looking for the weak link. That's where they'll strike. And it doesn't really surprise me sometimes that there's not going to be anything usually left remaining, and that's unfortunate. So even bodies were never found because of this. And in a lot of these rituals and things that they do, they don't leave any part of the body. I mean, they just they dissect the body. They use all the different parts. Different parts are used for different rituals and different things. There's not usually a whole lot left of the body. They even use the bones for these things. So, it doesn't surprise me that if a child or even a person like that disappears, that nothing is ever usually found of them afterwards.
So creepy again. Would make for a pretty messed up horror movie.
That's what I told somebody the other day. They need to check with us. Next time they want to write a horror movie, we could give them some very good suggestions.
Right? Seriously. It's insane how some of the movies they put out, because I'm a big creature feature person. I don't really like hack and slay and just, serial unalivers like Jason and Freddy. Not really my thing. I'm more of a vampire werewolf guy. Zombies are all right. Those are the type of movies, if I'm ever throwing something on in the background, I enjoy watching. Yeah, unfortunately, it's such a small genre.
You like me. You're very much like me. I'm a monster kid, too. I always like the
Yes.
monster movies, but yeah. But some of these slasher type torture movies, which are really sick, in my opinion, I,
Yes.
I don't watch them. I don't indulge in them. A lot of them, though, unfortunately, are very ritualistic in the way they put forth these movies, and I think in some ways they're glorifying this stuff. It really does not absolutely need to be glorified.
Some pretty messed up stuff, because I'm there with you. Some of the ones more popular based horror movies that have nothing to do with, the creature features, or yikes. Yeah, I'm all set with that.
Like what I told somebody the other day. You got junk food for the body, and then you got junk food for the mind. Either one of them is very bad for you, definitely.
Yes, isn't this true? Well, luckily for me, I'm on season 7 of True Blood, episode like 2 or 3. It will be over sooner than later. Cool stuff. Usually, though, if I'm editing my videos and I need to listen to audio, I will have something on in the background. Like right now, as I speak to you, a gift of mine and also a curse. I can focus on multiple things at once. If somebody wants me to focus on one thing, I'm not really too successful. Yet right now, as I speak to you, I'm watching the hockey game playoffs in the background. The Hurricanes are up against the Capitals right now, meaning that's usually what I'll have going on if I'm editing audio
Called
things.
multitasking.
Yes.
Multitasking. Yeah.
Gift and a curse, my friend, for sure.
You do writing and stuff like that. You have to concentrate. You have to put a lot of your concentration in that. Unfortunately, it doesn't allow you to multitask. Although when I do write, I like to listen to music while I'm writing. It kind of inspires me a little bit.
Yes, exactly. Great stuff right there. You are correct, though, when I do have to work on my book. Yet, as we are starting to tie this up, what do you have on the horizon cooking up for you?
Well, I'm doing some more research tonight, but I'm gonna start working on the book a little bit more. I kind of been lax on my book here lately, so I got to kind of start catching up with that a little bit. So I'm gonna be focusing on that a little bit more. But hopefully, we'll have some more cases like this one come in and more interesting stuff out there that's going on. So anyone listening to this, you know, would like to contact me and tell me their story or anything, or you, or contact whoever, any of us here, please feel free to do so. We want to hear your stories. We're not going to laugh at you. We're not going to think you're crazy. We're the last people in the world that will do that. And we are very confidential. We're not going to ever release any confidential information or anything like that. But please contact us and let us know if things are going on in your neighborhood like that, or your parks, or whatever the situation is. We want to know your story.
Boom. Yahtzee right there. Excellent stuff. To the audience, you can check out all of the great things that Dr. Carroll is churning out. How? Just check out the description. His good old links will be pinged for you. Also, you can always check out two great options: the playlist between Dennis and myself, or the good old science team playlist down below. You will catch Dennis's information cranking out. Yes, in those sections, he is always linking up with amazing guests and hosts and covers a very broad topic in comparison to what we cover here on Midnight Lycanthropy. He's also always kicking over and hanging out with the Cryptid Huntress. Everyone here should recognize that. Yes, Jessica Jones, she comes and hangs out with us as well. Make sure to go over and check out all the good content I did just mention. Yet, Dr. Carroll, is there anything else you would like to touch base on tonight before we let you get going?
Well, I'm just going to kind of warn everyone next time we get together and talk. I will definitely be talking about and telling some stories about African voodoo magic and witch doctor stuff that's going on over that. So I've got some stories to tell about that, and we'll talk about that hopefully next time.
Boom. That's some pretty gnarly stuff. All you got to do is just tell me next time we link up, this is what you want to cover. I'm all ears. I'm sure the audience will definitely enjoy it, as do I. The information you bring over here, big reason why you are cranked up on our good old science team. Again, excellent stuff. Yet to the audience, as previously stated, Dr. Carroll needs to get back to working on his book as well as his podcast. No worries though, he will be back here sooner than later. And also, we have a couple of his videos cooking up in the good old oven. You will be hearing from those very shortly as well. Yet, this will be the conclusion of the meeting of the Midnight Society for the early hours of the morning. If I do fear anything, it is the sunlight. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight, Dennis. I always do appreciate you.
It's always a pleasure, my friend.
My creatures of the night, you legends, you, I do adore every single one of you. And thank you for hanging out tonight. Please like, comment, subscribe, feed the truth to the algorithm. And we will see you very soon.